Hello, welcome to the best top 5. So today, once again, since it's Halloween month, every day in October it's Halloween. You can watch as many horror movies as you like. So that's why I'm here to talk about the top 5 80s horror movies. So the 80s produced a lot of great, memorable horror movies that everyone remembers. So today we're not doing Forgotten, we're just going straight to 80s memorable horror movies you can watch. Not just in Halloween, you can watch them any time of the year, that's up to you. So number 5 is Return of the Living Dead. So this movie is a kind of a quasi-sequel to Night of the Living Dead. So long story short, before I start a big long rant that goes on for 40 minutes, and it probably will, but it will be edited out, don't worry. The movie was its own thing originally, Return of the Living Dead, but they make references to Night of the Living Dead, so it got people confused as to, is this really a sequel? No, what happened was when Night of the Living Dead was made, George Romero directed and co-wrote it with Johnny Russo. And Johnny Russo originally wanted the film to be a little bit more comedic, and George Romero wanted to be more of a social commentary. So there's a bit of butting heads there with the storyline, but Night of the Living Dead thankfully became its own little thing, its horror social commentary. It was not a comedy. Actually, from my understanding, at the time it wasn't supposed to be a comedy. It was that John Russo wanted a more straight, streamlined horror film, and George Romero wanted a more of a social commentary. So they combined both of those things and it worked. It was for the sequel, Return of the Living Dead, which was the original title for Night of the Living Dead, was supposed to be more comedic, at least from John Russo's side. George Romero wanted something more of a social commentary again. So that's why George Romero lost not the rights, but I guess the permission to use Living Dead in his title. That's why it's called Dawn of the Dead, not Dawn of the Living Dead. Because John Russo went on to do Return of the Living Dead, his own sequel, sort of, to Night of the Living Dead, even though it's its own thing. Because when you watch Return of the Living Dead, they do mention Night of the Living Dead, but they mention it as remember that movie? None of it was a lie, it was actually true, and the zombies actually act completely different. And I like both films for different reasons. I like Dawn of the Dead as a serious social commentary film, and I love Return of the Living Dead for how silly, over the top. It's not scary, but it is pretty gory and it's pretty fun, and it has a great soundtrack, great 80s metal soundtrack. Has another 80s scream queen, Linnea Quigley, in this film. She plays one of the punk girls in the film. She has a really cool scene in the graveyard. And of course, the zombies in this film, they scream brains. They don't eat anything other than brains. They go, brains. There's also some really cool practical effects, especially with a zombie that I had never seen in any other zombie film before, where it's just the upper half of the zombie on this tray, and everything moves around, the spinal cord, everything, and it's animatronic. Again, it's before the advent of CGI, so it's all for real. And I thought it was really, really cool, and it's funny for the comedic effect that they're trying to get out of the film. I recommend this movie if you want to have a good time, just laugh. The sequel I like is not as memorable as the original, but it's basically the same movie all over again, and they make fun of the fact that they're basically making the same movie again. Return of the Living Dead 3, which is more straight horror, actually has some unintentional comedic parts. I don't know if you remember, there's a part where a guy has an identity crisis. You don't know if he's Hispanic, if he's Asian, or if he's a black. It's just the most craziest thing. So number 4 is a movie that Stephen King himself does not like very much. He ended up making his own version for TV. The movie is The Shining. I know that it's technically not faithful to the original book, and I like that because, again, there's a lot of remakes a lot of adaptations from books that try to do the same thing or even try to do something different, and it doesn't work. When it does work, like Jurassic Park, where they change the whole story completely to how it was in the book by Michael Crichton, same thing happens here with The Shining, directed by Stanley Kubrick, who did a magnificent job. This movie, just like Halloween and like other films that I mentioned before, it takes its time to develop. It's not using gore to scare you. I don't think gore ever scares anybody. It's just maybe a little disgusting. I think by today's standards, everyone's desensitized by the fact that gore is always on even on YouTube videos, you can watch any type of gore that you like. But when you actually make something genuinely scary and creepy, that's when you're actually effectively scared of what's going on the screen. And The Shining does an amazing job with that. It has probably one of the best performances, the second best performance from Jack Nicholson, number 1 being One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. In The Shining, he does a great job playing this guy who's a writer who's just going mad in this hotel and starts seeing weird things happening. Jack Nicholson did method acting in this film marvelously. Stanley Kubrick was notorious for doing a lot of takes and very, very meticulous, but it worked to his favor because this movie is a classic. Even though Stephen King has disowned it, I think it's worth owning on Blu-ray. Number 3 is another movie that I've mentioned hundreds of times in other lists, but I'll mention it again, but I won't talk as much about it, and that's The Fly. So The Fly was released in the 80s and still holds up today. It has great practical effects, has Jeff Golden's best performance on film. He did an amazing job with the practical effects, not just because Chris Wallace, who won an award for it, made him great, but it's the fact that Jeff Goldblum, the way he moved his eyes, the way he was unsettling, facing the fact that he's slowly becoming a 180-pound housefly. All those things worked to its favor. And David Cronenberg did an amazing job directing this film. I definitely love this movie, and I've watched it at least once a year. It's a great soundtrack also by Howard Shore, who's a composer who doesn't get mentioned as much. But Howard Shore has done a lot of soundtracks for a lot of horror movies that people don't remember. Again, I've mentioned this movie hundreds of times, so I don't think I should mention it more. But yeah, The Fly is a great 80s horror movie. Number 2 is another horror movie that I mentioned on other lists, probably just as much as The Fly, and that's The Thing. The Thing is a great 80s horror movie. I want to keep mentioning it until you watch it. Young people, fuck these shitty movies that you're getting now, like The Nun and Annabelle. Watch The Thing. If you want to watch a good horror movie, watch this 80s classic. Do not watch the prequel, also titled The Thing. I sometimes feel they use these titles to confuse people, kind of like The Asylum does with their mockbusters. They're trying to do the same thing with these movies, titling it the same so people can think, oh, this is the original. Oh no, it's a remake. Well, might as well just watch it, even though I already paid for it. I'll just watch it. No, make sure you're watching the 1982 version directed by John Carpenter. It's great. It's a good horror movie. It's basically, again, like I said in other videos, an alien comes down and it's trying to survive in a host and imitates the host, whether it be a dog or a human being, and they have to find out who it is. I love this movie. Check it out. Number 1, I have not mentioned on any list, but it's an 80s horror movie. It's a staple of 80s horror, and I think the guy who plays the main villain cannot be recast. This is probably one movie that has been remade. I don't think it can be remade, and that's A Nightmare on Elm Street. Nightmare on Elm Street is a classic 80s horror film, has a great soundtrack, it's scary, it's funny, it uses comedy and horror great, and it actually brought a lot of famous people into the spotlight, Johnny Depp being one of them. This is a movie that Johnny Depp doesn't really like watching anymore. He doesn't like watching his films, period, apparently. But he likes playing weirdos. This is one of the few films where he's just playing a regular teenager in a horror movie. And the reason why I said this movie can't be remade is because Robert Englund is Freddy Krueger. Unlike Michael and Jason, you can just cast anybody with a mask. Freddy, the way he talks, the way he is, they tried doing that remake in 2010, and I saw it and I thought it was terrible. It was just very bland, and the actor, who's the guy who played Rorschach in Watchmen, he wasn't very good. And I think if they cast someone else, it just doesn't work, because it's just the comedic one-liners and just the way he delivers those lines. It's just so Robert Englund, very much like Chucky. Chucky is Brad Dourif. I don't see anybody else playing that part, even though it's just a toy, an animatronic toy. It's the voice that lends to that particular character. Same thing with Robert Englund. You could put anybody else in that makeup. So I think there's certain characters that can be recast, and this movie is essential 80s horror, Nightmare on Elm Street. It holds up. It's both scary, and I like the fact that this was before CGI and it's practical, and I love it. So the sequels are also worth it. Some of them are better than others, but stay away from that remake released in 2010. So anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. Please let me know in the comments section down below if there is another 80s horror movie that I didn't mention. Please don't say Stranger Things. That's a TV show, and it's an inspiration from other horror movies, whatever. But do mention 80s stuff, like stuff that came out at that time that still holds up today. Anyway, guys,
Teen Wolf.
Oh, Teen Wolf 2?
Teen Wolf 2.
That's a classic. That's the movie that put what's this guy's name?
Jason Bateman on the map.
Oh yeah, can't think of anything else.
He hasn't done anything since.
No. Really memorable.
Whatever that is.
Yeah. So anyway, guys, until next time, bye.